Good morning, everyone. I'll just let you all get settled in and wait till the audio actually joins up for everyone. In the meantime, you might just see my lips flapping like they normally are. But yeah, welcome. Welcome to the first Outdoors Queensland Industry Forum for 2022. We're going to offer a series of these single theme forums on various topics. We also have our regular coffee and conversation sessions, which we're now doing monthly on the first Friday of each month. But we decided to offer some single themed forums as we go along. So, and this was the first one of the year. Trail recovery and reconstruction, as you're all aware, is the theme of the session, which is in response to the extreme weather events recently experienced in Queensland. Just some housekeeping and then we'll get started. We are recording the session. You would have got the a note about that. Yeah, we're going to make the recording available later. If you don't want, your image or whatever, feel free to not show your video. Please mute yourself until you want to speak. Feel free to rename yourselves so your organisation's visible as well as your name. And we'll use the chat as we go along. So please post questions, answers, comments in the chat. But feel free also just to pop your hand up in the reactions section, and if you want to have your say, because it is about a forum, a conversation, and we'll try to keep it to one person speaking at a time as we go along, which does not have to be me and shouldn't be me. So yeah, as we go, we'll get going, but we'll get started. First and foremost, Outdoors Queensland and AusCycling and Blue Sky Trails, just on behalf of the speakers, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where we gather across the state and interstate. We pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important roles that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples play on land, sky and waterways used for outdoor activities. I'm in Brisbane, or Meanjin, which is Yagara country. It's a place of the Jagera and Turrbal peoples. So if you'd like to, you can pop in the chat the place and the country that you're joining from today. And it's great to see so many people joining us in this session. We also acknowledge the funding provided by the Queensland Government, which supports outdoor activities right across Queensland, and acknowledge the work that various government departments do in relation to outdoor activities, which includes Sport and Rec, who are in the Department of Tourism, Innovation and Sport. So today's session, probably should introduce myself. I'm Dom Courtney. We've also got Mark Squires from Outdoors Queensland. It's Mark's birthday today, but he asked me not to tell you that. Also, Nick Hannon and Dale Percy from AusCycling are joining us, and Craig Menike from Blue Sky Trails. But most importantly, as I've just said, we've got a really impressive range of organisations, representatives from so many different organisations. It's really good to see. So we do appreciate the fact that people have taken the time to join us in today's session. So welcome. Little bit of an agenda there, as I've said, but it's really about, the whole idea of trail networks and what it's all about. So we've been doing a bit of work in relation to encouraging people to get back outdoors, to take care when you head outdoors, as and when trail networks reopen. So we know that conditions have changed in outdoor spaces and people need to modify expectations in relation to the spaces that they're engaging in. And we've been talking about checking websites, social media, which is really important in relation to, the information that the land managers have in relation to the trail networks that they're responsible for. But it's also a matter of, I guess our forum is really a matter of sharing information through clubs and other organisations. So what we really want to talk about today, the forum, is about what needs to be done so trail networks can be fully utilised again. And how we do that in the best possible manner, and I guess consider what it looks like to move forward and address the impacts of the recent natural disasters, flood events, severe weather event, whatever you want to call it, the impacts on our trail networks. A little bit of an overview, and then we'll get stuck into it. So there's no doubt about the fact that trails and trail networks are vital infrastructure for outdoor activities. Trails are where activities like walking, running, riding, scooting, rollerblading, and even paddling take place. So they also allow us to get to locations to undertake other activities like bird watching and climbing and camping. So for today's session, we are talking about trails in the broadest sense. So we're talking from bush tracks to concrete paths, from remote national parks where a trail might just be the route you walk between two markers, through to urban locations where you get a bit of a dirty look when you step onto the bike lane just because there's a puddle in the on the concrete path on the walking lane. So there's a range of different impacts where trails are closed or damaged. So businesses can lose clients, clubs lose members, regions lose tourism, workers lose employment, students miss out on outdoor learning, communities lose healthy opportunities, and people can lose interest in a particular activity if they don't have a local place to do it or their favourite place to do it. So we wanted to reflect on the recent weather events in today's sessions. And one of the big questions on that is your role in this forum. We've deliberately called it a forum. It's not a lecture. Our forum is a meeting where ideas and views on an issue can be exchanged. So for it to be successful, we really need to hear your views and ideas. We want you to speak from your experience and hear the experiences of others. We'd really love it if you use the chat to ask questions, or simply put your hand up, as I said earlier, and we'll go through, we'll do our best to answer questions throughout. There will be opportunities for questions, but if you've got a burning question, feel free. That's what we're really about. We want it to be quite open and to make that successful. And we might even have a prize for the attendee question that provokes the best discussion. But the judge's decision is final and no correspondence will be entered into in relation to what that might be. So moving right along, I'd like to introduce Nick Hannon and Dale Percy from AusCycling. So AusCycling recognise the value in this forum for their stakeholders. I was talking to Sean Muir from AusCycling about the fact this was coming up, and he said, oh yeah, we'd really like to be part of it. So they've offered to lend some of their expertise, particularly when it comes to trail networks, to the forum. Nick Hannon's the Executive General Manager, Government Strategy, and Dale Percy is General Manager, Mountain Bike Club Development with AusCycling. So I'll hand over to Nick to do a bit of an overview, and then I think he'll hand over to Dale. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Dom. Good morning, everyone. And yeah, just highlighting what you said there about, this is a forum and not a lecture. I think we'll bring what expertise we can to the table today, but conscious there are a lot of you on the call who live and breathe some of this stuff, and there's plenty of expertise out there. And I think one of the things I want to get out of this is hearing from you about your experiences, your challenges, where we might be able to collaborate and support, and make sure that, the good ideas that are out there get spread around and we can benefit from them all over Queensland and indeed around Australia. One of the big challenges for AusCycling is working out what is our role in all of this. We don't have an army of workers we can deploy, unfortunately. We don't have a magic pot of money that we can use to fund trail maintenance, but what we can do is support. We can support our clubs, we can support the broader mountain biking community, we can support landowners and councils with some of these challenges. And we're already doing some work in this space, building on things that were done by Mountain Biking Australia. We need to do more, and that's what we're keen to get stuck into. Before we get to that, I just wanted to share a couple of observations which I think really set the scene for why this is such an important challenge. Firstly, mountain biking in Australia is evolving at an incredibly fast pace. The latest AusPlay data, which is from October last year, is that there are 470,000 mountain bikers in Australia now. That number has undoubtedly gone up in the last 6 months. If you compare that to sports, that's more than rugby league and rugby union combined. It's about 50% more. If you look at other unorganised recreational activities, there are more mountain bikers in Australia than there are fishermen and women. So this is very much mainstream recreation and sport. It's not the fringe activity that it used to be perhaps 20 or 30 years ago. And what's amazing is how quickly that's changed. I think just 5 years ago, there were only 260,000 mountain bikers. So 80% growth in 5 years is pretty extraordinary. And I think most of us who ride bikes would know that without knowing the numbers. That would seem about right. You go to the trailhead now and the car park on the weekend is full. You get out on the trail and there's just so many more people out there riding their bikes, enjoying themselves, which is fundamentally fantastic, but it does bring with it some challenges which we need to address. More participation means greater demand for places to ride. We're seeing unprecedented investment in new trails, which is again a fantastic thing, but most people don't ride on new trails. They ride on trails that have been around for 10 or 20 or even 30 years. So we see popular trails getting far more traffic than they're used to, which requires more maintenance. And it can raise issues for trail managers and land managers around how they approach trail maintenance, how they approach risk management and things like that. As I look around the country, and we have a lot of conversations with clubs and trail managers, there seem to be some pretty consistent themes around the challenges they're facing. First and foremost, governance arrangements seem to be at the heart of a lot of problems we face in keeping our trail networks in good working order. Unclear governance arrangements, unclear roles and responsibilities, or relationships that have evolved over time rather than being the product of a focused planning effort. We have some stakeholders who don't really understand mountain biking and what it is now, as opposed to what it used to be. And that can impact on how they respond to some of these challenges. There's a heightened awareness of environmental issues, both in the community and within government. I think an almost universal challenge we've got is the difficulty in finding revenue to fund trail maintenance. I think unless you're a commercial bike park, there's really no silver bullet there. There's a whole range of different approaches that often you need a combination of to really make it work. And we've got volunteers who want to be involved, which is fantastic. People who want to contribute their time and hard work to repairing and fixing trails. But we need to make sure we look after them, that they've got the skills and expertise to do the job, that they can do it safely, they can do good work, and that fundamentally landowners are comfortable with them coming on and doing that work on their land. It seems to me that if you don't have some of these fundamental things sorted out to begin with, your year in and year out maintenance task is quite challenging. And that's before you have, the wettest summer we've had in decades, before you have flooding events and that high level of damage that we're continuing to see. So what are we trying to do to help in this space? Well, there's a whole range of different little projects that are underway. You might be familiar with the Australian Mountain Bike Trail Guidelines, which is something that MTBA pulled together. Currently, they're only available in hard copy, and it can be pretty hard to get hold of. So as a very simple step, we're trying to make those more available and updating them where we can. We're also looking at what other documents and pieces of expertise we might be able to bring together and make available to clubs and the broader community. We're looking at options to better train volunteers and provide more support for clubs as they deploy volunteers in trail maintenance. And we're looking at facilitating a better connection between the mountain bike industry and the needs of local mountain bike communities. I think this is a partnership that in some places works very well, but could be a lot more than what it currently is. So that's essentially why I'm keen to hear some of your views today. I know, as I said, there are people on this call who are from areas that do great work in this space, but there are plenty out there who don't, and I think we need to find the good examples and share them around. I was going to ask Dale to jump in at this point, but I gather his office internet has just failed him. Dale's based in Brisbane. I'm based in Canberra, so I haven't managed to get up to Queensland to go for a ride yet this year. Judging from Dale's Instagram, he's on the mountain bike trails every weekend, and he's been sending through a steady stream of photos of both trail damage and also work to fix trail damage. And so I guess I'm keen to hear what your experiences have been and what your challenges might be. Is there anyone there who would like to lead us off and contribute something at this point? Dale, are you back on? I might start with you, and if you could let us know what you've been seeing around the trails you've been riding.
Yeah, no, I'm back on. Hi, everyone. My role with AusCycling is club development. I've been in my role since November. I'm based in Brisbane the Redlands. So I'm in the middle of what we're probably all experiencing with the effects of the rain and damage caused. The biggest frustration for me as an individual or rider is the breakdown between the landowners and the clubs. So it's important today to get a bit of feedback from everyone involved as to your challenges. So Nick and I can certainly work forward of how AusCycling can help this space, connecting landowners to clubs. Yeah, basically the recovery of trails. So I noticed, Dan, you're on the forum.
Dale, what would you say is the underlying cause of that breakdown? Is there a single issue that's causing this, or is it a more complex thing than that?
Probably a more complex thing. From my experience in my local regions, probably a lack of understanding of what the club can provide in terms of trail care and basic communication.
That's certainly something that we see. I mean, I've got plenty of examples from outside of Queensland where often it's that relationship between the landowner and whether it's the club or whether it's another riding group that is the foundation for everything that comes after that. And if you don't get it right, if you don't have really a clear understanding of who's responsible for what and how that relationship will work, then it makes everything else much harder to achieve.
Dale and Nick, we do have some land managers on the forum right now, so maybe it's a matter of opening that up. And I know as well Dan from Bora. I think that's probably part of what this is about, is opening up that conversation about those opportunities. I just saw Philip just put a comment on there about happy to talk to that too. So I think that's a good opportunity to bring a few others in. How do you want to go? Do you want to?
I'm absolutely keen to hear Philip's views on, from his perspective.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So I manage the Scouts Queensland property called Kringle and Mount Cotton. We had a lot of rain, as everyone in and around the Redlands would know, and we're a bit downstream from the Eastern Escarpment property. So that's where most of it ended up, was in our property. We were really lucky. The day after the flooding started going down, we had clubs ringing us to ask, can we come in? Can we help fix the trails? They wanted to get in and fix it. And where we were is we were still assessing buildings and we were still assessing infrastructure. And then we finally got to the point where we probably could have started doing some recovery, but we just didn't have the raw materials we needed to get working. And in such, we're a big organization, and some of our challenging places can be being reactive. We've got to complete projects and tick our governance boxes. and it's sometimes really difficult to be reactive of go in and fix a trail. But really grateful for all the support, and the guys have been working hard where they can. So,
are there any other thanks, Phil? Are there any other landowners on?
Oh, there's plenty, mate. Yeah, so we've got Kurt from the Sunshine Coast put a couple of comments on there, including a bit of a list about or a YouTube link to the damage at Sugarbag. Did you want to talk to that at all, Kurt?
Yeah, no worries. That's all good. Yeah, so I'm, you know, obviously Kurt Martin, Rec Trails Officer with Sunshine Coast Council. So as a land manager with, well, Sugarbag is my mountain bike specific trail network, but across my network, I'm looking probably upwards of $750,000 worth of damage across the network at the moment, based on current estimates. So the scale is definitely a challenge at this current time. I mean, Sugarbag's probably an interesting example. You can look at the video there that I put up. I have a very strong and active volunteer base there, which is great. But the scale and quantum of work involved is quite challenging. And so I guess this is the nexus of where we're at, and probably hinges off, say, some of my other presentations where, you know, that we're around volunteering is voluntary as a cultural paradigm shift. Trying to get a place, and I guess this comes down to funding and the resourcing required to do it. And I work for a very well-resourced council as they go. And even for us, it's quite a challenge when we look at these quantums to understand how we're going to deal with these sorts of events moving forward, how we're going to maintain the network that's continually growing, looking to double in the next 5 years in terms of just raw distance, based on some new acquisitions and new plans that are starting to come together for us. And just really trying to understand the impacts of this. And that was probably my primary comment there. So I'm not sure how many people are aware, Queensland Recovery Authority is the main state agency involved in disaster recovery efforts in Queensland. I've been having active conversations with the branch that's helping our region do its recovery elements. What they have open right now is what they call Category B funding. So that's essential infrastructure for our community. And to be honest, that largely revolves around roads. So it's roads, drainage, elements that keep our community moving. However, when you start bleeding into active transport and trails and pathways and other spaces like that, it is currently falling outside of the definitions of essential infrastructure. So when you have these events, they're not set up for it because it's not in their mandate, and it's not classed as Category B funding. So what we're currently doing is trying to collect data and information, photos, records of this repair work, because we can't really wait. Because a lot of our trail networks have degraded to the point where they're outside their trail classification due to the damage on them. So, you know, class 3 trails are now class 4 or 5, you know, so the damage is enough that we have to start to mitigate the damage as a council. But our only hope is that they open up Category D funding at some point in time, which then allows us to put in bids for Category D funding. But again, because it's not essential infrastructure, there's no guarantees. So when we look at a quantum of trail damage like what we're currently facing, yeah, it's a big question, you know. And like I said, the volunteers have been in doing multiple weekends, and we've managed to reopen Sugarbag with signage up saying that it's been damaged, but we've taken the worst of it out, which has been great. The actual long-term recovery is a question, because, you know, we're looking at 2 months of work in Sugarbag, you know. And that's 2 months of work, you know, four to 5 days a week. So that's not, you know, asking volunteers to do that level of work. You know, you're either going to be 5 years away, or you're going to be overtaxing a group that already gives a lot, you know, and they're only, you know, if we're lucky, 5% of the riders, probably more like 1% of the riders. So this is the issue. It's, you know, the community that actually utilizes these resources have traditionally been trading on the efforts and backs of very few dedicated individuals. So there's a lot of evolution, I think, in this space. If I was going to say where could advocacy occur, it's definitely trying to get more of this recreational infrastructure space considered as an essential part of our community. You know, so for Outdoors Queensland or AusCycling or those outfits, it's conversations at the state level with QRA or other politicians or other agencies to say, you know, these events are going to occur. How are we going to recover our infrastructure? You know, what is the model going to look like for recovery moving forward? And, you know, the bigger question, you know, I mean, maybe it is a logical argument that councils are responsible for their internal trail networks on a general maintenance basis, and we are moving very rapidly trying to understand them as assets, which traditionally they weren't really classified. I mean, they've only become crossed into our asset management system in the last couple of years. So while the barbecue shelters, the bollards, the random hard infrastructure was, the actual trails themselves, unless they were asphalted or concreted, weren't inherently seen as assets in our system until the last couple of years. So we're still evolving in that space to line it up. But when you're asking a council to see a new asset, you know, and you've got, well, we've got about 75 kilometers of open to public trail network and probably another 130 kilometers of maintenance management and other trails that the community do use. We just don't publish them as recreation trails. You know, when you add that level of asset to your environment, and then you start asking for that kind of funding to maintain it, you obviously can probably guess the answer there, you know, when you're asking for that kind of money. So that's a synopsis of where we're at. We're actively in recovery, but we're holding our breath and praying that Category D gets activated so we have a chance at some sort of recovery of funds, because none of these repairs are budgeted at this point in time.
Can I just ask a question? So my understanding from involvement long ago with disaster recovery is that pretty much all sport and rec facilities are excluded from Cat B. Does council, yeah, so are you trying to balance, you know, you've obviously got trails that have sustained damage. Do you have other sporting infrastructure that's sustained damage that you need to consider in this prioritisation of work as well?
Yeah, so there is a bit of moderate damage to a couple of our sporting areas. And I mean, this is also a bigger problem for us because unfortunately, it's not like we get the premium land for a lot of our infrastructure. So a lot of our sporting fields and a lot of our infrastructure tends to be somewhat flood prone. I think in regards to building damage this time through, it's been relatively good. A lot of fields inundated and stuff. So we do have a level of recovery there that the sport and rec team is looking at. You know, again, this is the conditions on Category D haven't been defined. It hasn't been announced, so we don't know where that's going. So all the respective branches, me looking at the trails and the sport and rec guys looking at sport and rec, is we're aiming for the recovery that we need to do, and we're basically channeling that through to some centralized funds. Now, obviously, as a council, we have a level of recovery funding that we put aside, and then our council tries to build back up before the next event comes along, and then we tap into it to get the work done, and then we hope that we actually get some support from the state and feds. And to be honest, that's not overly clear. We are actively engaged with QRA, so I have a meeting coming up next week to discuss the data capture and the information that I'm currently collecting. Like, that's what I've basically been spending the last couple of months doing, is setting up the contracts. I mean, the other elephant in the room is actually having contractors and resources available to do any of this work, because that's not an easy given in our region and our thing. And there's a lot of demand, cross demand between, say, my council and, say, the state Queensland Parks guys and other people, all looking for the same, you know, 1, 2, or maybe 3 contractors that kind of work in this space. So sorry to ramble on, but yes, Nick, we're currently recovering on all fronts as much as we can, and then hoping that when Category D comes along, we get some clarification of what's going to be covered, and then putting that bid into the state when it happens.
No, thanks. That's really good to know. One of the things I see all the time talking to stakeholders at the state and federal level is there is a fair lack of information about what mountain biking is and why it's important. It's still seen as that fringe activity. And when you start talking to them around the participation rates and how many people are getting out there and the economic value of mountain biking in Australia, it's that argument around these assets are as valuable as the footy field, as valuable as the netball courts. You know, it's not something off to the side anymore. It's actually a core asset that the community uses, and that's the case around, you know, why it should be in Cat D and why it needs to be funded not just by council but by state and federal government.
Well, and probably more importantly is some sort of visual priority or line of sight be given to it, because at the moment, even when you're talking, say, grant applications, even for establishment works and stuff like that, I mean, council like mine is allowed to put in 3 grant bids for the big grant funding, sport and rec grant funding in our state. I will never get a chance to put mine in because I am obviously have to be pooled with lighting and sports fields and big sporting developments. And internally, you know, as far as quantums go, you know, priority is probably still generally going to be given to those projects. So once in a blue moon, I might get through to be able to apply as a council applicant for those level of grants. So generally, I've been running them through the clubs. So the clubs have been putting in the thing. And again, this is that partnership's important. But again, I get back to, I love volunteers and I love working with them, but I love volunteering to be voluntary. And that's not inherently the case now, because the clubs are definitely doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the riding community at this point in time, as far as I know, in Australia, let alone Queensland or elsewhere. So
perfect. I just saw Ben's put a comment in there from Northside Trail Care Alliance too about the collaboration with QPWS. Did you want to talk to that, Ben? I lost you.
Yeah, I'm here, but I'm in a cafe. Just shortly, I know Craig Meninki's around here somewhere as well, and he's one of our coordinators. That was probably our saving grace for Bunyaville and Sanford, being able to have that agreement already in place, allowing us to have access to go in there and audit the damage and then get permission to remediate and start fixing things straight away. I think we were in there within 2 weeks. So that really made a big difference. If we didn't have that agreement, that certainly would not have happened. So that's what I wanted to point out, just the importance to now for everybody to think, well, how do we get access? How do we organise so we have access in these situations going forward?
Hey, Ben, Dan here, I would echo that one. I mean, it's definitely something that we saw, you know, and I participated in one of those days myself, but certainly with the landowner that we work with, you know, there's been, you know, unfortunately that that collaboration hasn't been in place, and, you know, we've been trying to put it in place. Just the timing was just terrible, but I know that if it had been in place, we would have been in a far better position to, you know, jump in with volunteers like you guys were able to. That to me is probably the absolute key thing around communication and having that relationship in place. And I think it's, you know, it's been borne out in right across Southeast Queensland, where those things have been in place, or arrangements of some sort have been in place, either with contractors or with, you know, with the volunteer organisations. Then they've been able to move a lot quicker. And where it's not in place, you know, we're absolutely on the back foot. Question I have, and maybe it's off topic, and maybe it's something that Craig will pick up later on, but is just around, I guess, the distinction between, you know, recovery, you know, getting things fixed so they can, you know, build back better, versus, you know, opening them up, you know, soon enough for, you know, trails so that they can be still ridden, but without actually being built back, you know, perfect. And it sounds like Kurt, that that's some of what you guys have done. You know, I guess the distinction between reopening versus completely, you know, rejuvenating, and whether or not that sort of fits into how that fits into the funding, you know, equation or discussion that needs to happen with recovery, the QRA as well.
Yeah, well, the sport and rec recovery funds that the club has been working on getting applications in for is largely that immediate recovery. So that's how do we get back open so that, you know, little Timmy on his little bike doesn't disappear into a washout that's, you know, a meter deep at this point in time. So it's that immediate, you know, take the edge off kind of work. Whether you're trying to get your trail back to that nice flow trail that everybody loved riding is another story entirely, you know, in regards to the labor and cost associated with that. So there's two elements that have been enacted. So right now we're just starting to move into the restoration phase. And then right after the event, we were, okay, closed for a month while we just got our head around things and things dried out a bit. Got in with the volunteers and we took all of the edges off of everything and actually did a pretty decent job of recovering one of our current trails to a pretty good nick. But then we're moving into the rest of the network now, at least at Sugarbag. And then there's all the other walking trails and everything else too. I mean, Sugarbag is 15 kilometers of my 75 kilometers, of which I estimate about 40% have been damaged in some fashion.
Just on that too, I just saw we do have a couple of people from QPWS. So I just wonder if anyone from there wanted to speak. Kurt just made a good point. It's not just mountain bike trails, it's also all the walking trails and all the other bits and bobs out there. I mean, you know, it's just so much potential out there for recovery. So did anyone from, I saw Nathan's on there, or others that wanted to comment on the trails that, you know, have been impacted, have already been opened or may not be open for a while? You don't have to, but it's always nice to hear from a range of people. All right, I will talk about the sport and rec funding that is available too. I've got a slide coming up on that. But yeah, thank you for that. Might just move on to Craig from Blue Sky Trails. Yeah, thank you very much for everyone who's contributed to that part. So moving right along, so Craig's the director of Blue Sky Trails, also, as we just heard, a member of the North Brisbane Dirt Dogs and Northside Trails. Sorry, I just got it wrong. Trail Care Alliance. Yeah, so over to you, Craig, and yeah, thanks for joining us today, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Dom, and thanks, Dom and Mark, for organising this morning, and everyone for jumping on and spending their time. When Dom said he was going to put this forum on, he didn't have to ask me twice. Anyone who knows me knows that I have passion for trails, and I love talking about them. So, yeah, as I said, director of Blue Sky Trails, and also trail care coordinator for Northside Trail Care Alliance at Sanford Conservation Park. I guess just before I jump into the slide, I guess I just want to reiterate what Nick and Kurt and Dale have spoken about around that governance and funding arrangements for trails. Over the last 5-10 years, we've had a massive amount of trails built, but not a lot of funding or thought has gone into how to actually maintain those trail networks. So we're involved in a couple of projects down the south coast of New South Wales at the moment where they are actually creating or putting money aside to set up governance frameworks and actually kick off trail care groups and contracted trail management. So that's good to see that the industry is actually starting to move in that direction, and land managers and funding organisations are actually starting to think about not just building the asset, but then how they're going to manage that asset moving forward. So yeah, it is good to see. But as Kurt said, it is the elephant in the room as far as all these trails, trying to maintain them and keep them going into the future, especially when we have these wet summers in southeast Queensland. So yeah, mate, you want to jump to the next slide? So I guess these 10 steps that I'm going to go through here, sort of a combination of both work I do through Blue Sky plus some learnings that we found from the Northside Trailcare Alliance experience, just getting our trail networks up and running just recently. So I guess the first step, and Kurt sort of touched on this, is getting that damage assessment done. And the key part for that we found was you only need to do that when it's safe. We had a hell of a lot of trees down. A lot of networks have had trees down, and we had guys out. I think Ben was actually out in the bush with a widowmaker came down not far from him. So it's definitely keen to make sure that it's safe to get out there and do it. Trained resources. So we've got a core group of guys, and we work with land managers to bring their guys up to speed to know what to look for in tracks, not just mountain bike tracks, walking tracks, shared use tracks as well. It's also important when you think about a lot of trail networks, it's not just the single track that connects the network and makes it work. It's actually the fire trails as well. And often you see that fire trails get damaged more than single tracks just because of the volume of work, volume of water that comes down fire trails, and often the lack of ongoing maintenance that some of those fire trails get. I guess the other thing, we streamlined our data capture through the use of an app to capture all the data and produce reports and communicate to land managers. That was through Northside Trailcare Alliance, but also other clients. And then make sure you have a process for escalating those significant issues where even if your trails are closed, mountain bikers are pretty pig-headed, so they're going to go out and ride anyway. So it's a case, if there is something out there that's going to coat hanger someone or axe someone, getting in there and fixing it straight away, even if the trails are still theoretically closed. So the second step there, communicate with users. So that's sort of, I think you really need to use a no BS approach, especially when you're dealing with mountain bikers. Get in early, let them know what's happening, confirm the closures if you are closing a trail network, and letting them know why, and photos, sharing photos as to why you've closed the trail. So that photo there, that's Bovine Groove up at Mount Joyce, and that's the second time that crossing there has looked like that in the last couple of years. And the last time Trailworks went in there and put in some massive boulders, but just the volume of water that comes down that creek just tears it out. So sharing a photo with that, letting know, hey, this is why your trails are closed, can sort of connect the dots, if you like. On to the next point there, Dom. So developing a plan, and this is sort of what Kurt, I guess, was talking about before, sharing the experience with Seckwater there, who's a land manager there, but also with QPWS at Sanford and Bunyaville, actually identifying what that minimum viable product trail network is. So what trails are still in pretty good nick? How can you create a loop to get people out riding again as quickly as you can? And so what's logical, what's ease of access, what provides, green trails to get everyone out on the trail and just riding anyway. So, and connecting up with your fire trails if you need to. So on the next one there, so resources. So this is sort of that contractor versus volunteer play there where Kurt's touched on. Contractors are very thin on the ground at the moment, as far as they're always busy this time of year, coming into the end of financial year, but the amount of damage across networks in South East Queensland, North New South Wales has really put a load on them. And then the volunteers, so what's actually achievable with volunteers without burning them out. And again, getting back to that, the materials, not just the availability of rock and road base. We even had the problem of, you want to buy a couple of metres of road base, but it was actually soaked. So the trucks can only fill half loads because the road base is soaking wet. So you don't sort of think about those things at the time. You just need to get some materials in, but it all adds up, sort of thing, So, and then resources as far as doing the work, whether it's childcare days for Northside Trailcare Alliance, these guys have hour sessions where they actually just get out before and after work and smash out a bit of work. And then we've also got a crew that have adopted a trail, which is they just get out and keep it in good nick. So to date for Northside Trailcare Alliance, I think it's about 1,200 hours of volunteer work so far in the 6 weeks since the event. So you're at $30 an hour rate onto that, it's a significant contribution by volunteers, if you like. So then coordinating the works, contractors are pretty easy as long as you can get them on site. Volunteers, not so much. Ben's already spoken about the memorandum of understanding and the collaborative agreements. They're sort of critical to get that understanding, and that's where you develop your trust from between the land manager and the childcare group, and spell out your rules of the game, those sort of things. So specifically talking back to Northside Childcare Alliance, that one's built on 25 years of work, 25 years of work out on park, so there's a hell of a lot of trust that has been built up over the years. You need to have good team leaders out there running your teams, and then creating some smart tools to actually coordinate your work. So whether they be inductions, safety plans, and recording your hours. So QR codes, we all know how to use a QR code after the last couple of years, but connecting that into smart forms and that sort of thing to actually collect what's going on and push out inductions and safety information is great. And with that, you can then produce reports on outcomes and stuff like that. So on to the next one, Dom. So that's a bit of work there. Those photos in Bundyville, I think, the before and after, with one of our junior crew out there digging. So yeah, so communicating progress, just keep riders up to date, or users altogether up to date. We're not just talking about riders there, we're talking about walkers, shared use trails. Trail running is a massive thing as well. So just keeping those guys up to speed, obviously opening your trails as quick as possible, letting people know that there are trail changes, so not to go down the trails how they used to ride them, take it easy on the first couple. And I guess recognising contributions of both staff and volunteers. I know in a lot of these events, working with QPWS and SecWater and other land managers, some of their people went over and above what's required of them to get these trail networks up and running and to coordinate work. So it was great to see. Right, so the next, building capacity. So this is all about, I guess, using some of these events as an opportunity to build capacity within your organisation and within your team. So that's to actually train them about what is a sustainable trail, how to coordinate and implement works, and you're essentially looking to create new team leaders to get out there and also build that, really build that understanding capacity within your team. And I know with some land managers, it's been a real awakening for, I guess, the contribution of some childcare groups and also of the mountain biking community to how these parks and trails operate. And I guess one learning that we've come out of there from just looking at the trail networks that we've worked on, trail networks that have had recent maintenance, so we're talking sort of the last 6 months that have been maintained, trail networks that have good sustainable trail alignments, and where the work's been really good quality, they've held up a lot better than trails that have been sort of run down or haven't been maintained recently. So getting those three things right is critical to the management of any trail network. So improvement opportunities. So this is really about, the trails network's been really beat up. What can we do? We've obviously got to fix it and get it going again. But how do we actually improve the trail network so that the next time we get one of these events, because they're going to happen again, how do we fix it so that it doesn't happen again? So whether you're looking at realignments to get better sustainable alignments, creek crossings, taking out causeways, putting in bridges, whatever. So looking back at that, on that previous slide, that crossing at Mount Joyce, we're now looking with SecWater to actually put a bridge over there, so that every time that happens, we're not going to be going back there and fixing the same problem, And yeah, just get a whole refresh of your network essentially. That's a lot of hard work. So celebrating achievements, I think this is really, really important for volunteer groups, but also for any land manager with their team. A barbecue with some cold drinks after a dig session never goes astray. recognising people on social media or within your organisation. Couple of things that I've seen that work really well. For Northside Trailcare Alliance, those guys had some jerseys that they gave out to the top 5 diggers for a recent package of work, which was pretty cool. And then I know Jindabyne Trail Stewardship have a program where you come along to one trailcare session, you get a sticker. You come along to 5, you get a hat. You come along to 10, you get a shirt. You know, so it's that really recognition of the contribution that people are making. Yeah. And then I guess sharing his story. So that's what I'm on here about this morning, is just to share, so that, you know, if anyone could pick up 1 or 2 things from what we're presenting here today, or make connections to help improve their trail networks going forward. It's really, I think, part of what it was sort of touched on earlier, but it's really recognising trails as community assets. I don't think at the moment they're really fully recognised as an asset. Where I think that needs to be a change, and actually assigning a dollar value to an asset is critical. And I guess where assets are maintained by volunteers, that often doesn't happen because there's no budget assigned, there's no invoice that comes in at the end of the month for the work that those volunteers are doing. So, you know, that's definitely a change of thinking that land managers need to make as far as recognising trails as assets. I think there's great opportunity for some of this is to actually build that better goodwill between trail users and land managers moving forward. So to actually recognise the roles and responsibilities of each group and have that respect for each for one another, and how you can work together. We're all after the same thing at the end of the day. So it's really having that goodwill. And I think the other thing then is also the stewardship within the user groups, whether that's riders, runners, walkers, whoever's using the trails, just to I guess understand the work that goes into operating and maintaining a trail network. And one of the big things for the mountain biking industry is really getting our riders to recognise and respect trail closures, so that, you know, when a trail's closed, it's closed, so you can get in there and it's closed for a reason, and we need to get in there and do some work. So yeah, I guess that's my top 10 tips that I've come across over the last little bit from working in the industry, and also just these the response to this recent rain event, which has been pretty extreme and is ongoing. We're still fixing trails, we're still getting rain, so it's an ongoing challenge.
Craig, all questions. That's awesome. I've got a question, and that is, what do you think? And maybe this is for, you know, I guess other folks who've been involved in the assessment and recovery process in particular sites around SEQ as well. But I mean, for me, it's so important to take some learnings away from this and, you know, make some changes along those lines that you talked about. What do you think I guess the impact of this event is versus, you know, last year, the year before, the last time, you know, something really, really significant happened? Is this, you know, I guess how normal is this? How normal is this going to be in the future? How ready do we have to be to deal with this kind of thing again?
Yeah, without having a crystal ball, mate.
No, sure.
I think they're sort of they're becoming more frequent, but I think what it highlights is, especially with the work you do on your trails, is quality over quantity. So, you know, if you're building a grade reversal, build a grade reversal, build it big, build it well. You know, drainage, people sort of, you know, get bored with doing drainage, but the fact of the matter is that's the foundation of a good trail network. So I think it's getting back to that, building resilience into your trail network, of actually building your features bigger, having an ongoing maintenance program to do that boring stuff, to do the drainage. You know, I think trail sponsorship and trail adoption are part of the solution to actually, you know, guys who love their trail get out and maintain the trail weekly or whatever. You're not really wearing them out because they love what they're doing. But then the trail adoption to actually create a revenue stream that you can use to get contractors in to do some of that boring stuff, and then use your volunteers to do the fun stuff, if you like, build your features and rebuild burns and all that stuff that they love doing, you know. So Yeah, I think we need to build resilience into our trails essentially, because these events aren't gonna go away. So we just need to try and harden our trails where we can to prevent damage in the future.
So on that exact point, Craig, Amanda just put a comment in the chat, or a question in the chat: who provides training in terms of sustainable trail design, best practice, such as reducing erosion and drainage?
Yeah. So we're doing some sessions with AusCycling at the moment. So Denise Cox got some funding a couple of years ago to do some training, and that's been delayed a couple of times because of COVID. But yeah, we provide those sessions in collaboration with AusCycling. So they sort of do one-day sessions for I guess it's capacity building within management teams and within land managers to actually bring their staff up to speed on how to have informed conversations with riders and also contractors, and then 2-day training programs specifically aimed at volunteer groups to create team leaders. So giving them a theory about sustainable trail development, and then also getting out and doing the practical to actually build some trail.
And I think one of the challenges there, just to add to what Craig was saying, is how do we scale that so that it's available, more broadly across the community? We've gotten grant funding in the past to deliver things, and unfortunately grant funding only gets you so far. So how do we turn this into a model where there's more support for volunteers and for clubs doing this work?
Yeah, I would concur with you, Nick. I mean, I think there's one of the things that's missing in this space is the actual mountain bike sales industry in Australia, in regards to the fact that their whole business model is trading on infrastructure that has to exist, but there's little contribution back to that infrastructure. And if you have a look, say in Washington, Evergreen Mountain Bike Alliance as an example, I mean, they basically have quite so they're a statewide representative agency. They get a range of sponsorship, but they also have half a dozen or more paid staff. It's a mix between a commercial, not-for-profit balance. Like, they get hired to do work, but they also run a lot of volunteer stuff at the same line. And there's nobody sitting in that space. We have a range of commercial providers, not enough in our region, who do the commercial work. But then it's kind of that mix. So I have a look at Evergreen if you're interested, Nick, because it's a model I've always thought could be imported to Southeast Queensland, at least, because there's enough density of population and trails and networks to look at that. So at the moment, we've got Corca, then Bush Rangers, then Bora, then, we've got all of these different groups trying to manage their little patches. What Evergreen is a larger entity that makes itself financially stable, pays for experts to be trained, and then they provide a lot of support to each of those individual regions or groups. So, the local club can arrange for Evergreen to come in, train its local staff, bring its expertise into play, and provide a lot of that supporting infrastructure. It's only one model, but it's an interesting model. And this is where AusCycling, now as the auspicing body for MTBA folding into you guys, it's like, how does all of that come to play, and what is the structure of that? And I do think there's a place to be talking to advanced traders and other larger mountain bike importers. I mean, not the shops. I mean, the shops aren't making enough money, but the importers, to say, all of these e-bikes, all of these bikes that you're selling, this is the infrastructure that's out there. If you want us to build new stuff and maintain, how are you going to contribute to the community that allows for this infrastructure to move forward? Something I've thought a lot about, but haven't had the leverage to begin the conversation.
Nick, I'd love to chat with you about that. I mean, I've been having a conversation, Kurt, with one of the retailers, not one of the ones you mentioned, about doing a little project that will contribute a smidge of this project back into the community. So that kind of idea, I guess that overall pure advocacy, Nick, that AusCycling could bring to the table, that I've mentioned to you guys before, that would be amazing to put something like that together.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. There's a role for industry here. I think some industry players have gotten involved in trail maintenance and upkeep, but they've done it on a fairly piecemeal basis, which is great if you're the area that they're focusing on, but for everyone else, they kind of miss out. So I think the question is, how do we get industry to do something across the board that lifts everyone and makes life easier for everyone?
Terrific. I know we're running out of time. I just wanted to flag, and we mentioned earlier about some of the state government disaster recovery funding. So Sport and Rec are taking the lead on this for Queensland's entire active industry, so sport, recreation, I guess, and fitness. So they are really keen. They're involved in the assessments. They've got that sr.disaster email address as well. They really want to be involved in what's going on. So if you've got information you can provide to them, they really are keen. This was a slide they put out. It was pretty soon after the February-March incident. So the big part that they're talking about is if you're getting involved in cleanup, make sure you're doing it correctly. But, most of those messages still apply, carry out physical inspection, take photos and videos and wear the appropriate PPE, etc. So all of that still applies. And the other one, which was mentioned earlier about the funding and grant support. So there's different levels of funding available. And that includes the Queensland Reconstruction Authority that Kurt mentioned earlier. We've discussed. There's the Q Rider, which is the Queensland Rural Industry Development Authority funding. That includes small businesses and not-profit organisations. So that's up to $50,000. There's the Sport and Rec, I'm going to get it wrong now, SRDRP, Sport and Rec Development Recovery Program, I think it is. I probably got that one wrong. So that was $5,000, and these are cumulative. So you can actually get $75,000 under these if you're a non-profit organisation involved in sport and rec.
Quick question. Sorry, I know you're running out of time, but are any of these actually linked, or do you need to have a club or your association needs to have a link or a lease to the facility that you're talking about? Because I looked at some of these and stopped at that first point. There didn't seem to be any way for a club or an organisation that doesn't have a lease over a property to actually access any of that.
MOU, sorry, I'll just jump in. So Dan, if you have an MOU or other agreement, it seems to work. So like Corca doesn't have a lease over the trail network or anything here. So you do have to have a land manager agreement probably to get through the gate. But it can be structured in a way that's more acceptable.
Yeah, you guys are unique there, I think. It's a bit of a rarity.
It doesn't, they don't need formal tenure, but I think it does need some sort of arrangement in place is probably the thing on that, Dan. The bit on this...
For ours, Dom, we just use a letter of support for the stuff doing with Northside Trailcare Alliance. So that's how it's just a letter of support from the land manager.
Yeah, I think that's what I was just going to say. I think the key part of this is the government actually wants to get this money out there to where the money's needed. That's what it's for. They don't. The last thing they want, they want these trails to get fixed up, and they want to take some of the pressure off. So I think they've been quite open about this as far as get in now and make sure you consider what you might be available to, what you might be eligible for. But the other option is literally ring them up and have a chat. If you don't quite fit the round hole, if you're a square peg, it's worth getting in touch with them and having a chat to them and say, well, what do we actually need, rather than giving up on it, because they genuinely want to get some of this money out the door and they want to see these community facilities fixed up. So from the conversations we've had with some of the people at Sport and Rec, they are so keen to do a lot of work on this. They did a lot of work up in Townsville after, I think it was 2019, when they had a lot of damage to the facilities up there, that monsoon event, and that included the mountain bike trails up there, which the Townsville Club had done so much work on at that point. So they're keen on trail networks. I don't think this is just all about sport, even though the picture on their slide there, I think, is a hockey set up, but it is about trails as well as the slides. But I just wanted to flag it there. Craig's just answered, Dan, and you're there about.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no worries.
And Dom, I'll just chain one other comment is if you're getting in, if you're going to, you need to get in on the 5,000 because they actually kind of chain from each other. So the 5,000 is open till the end of the financial year, as I understand it. So you can retroactively access that $5,000 worth of funding. But getting that application in and through the system is what gives you the chain to the 15K and then further up. So it's kind of it's a tiered system. The 5K is that immediate recovery stuff, and then they move on to the more, restoration kind of stuff as they move forward. So I definitely, anybody who's in this space, if you've even been doing stuff already or whatever, you definitely need to keep records so that you can get into that 5K that can then get you into some of the later funding. And all of those things have time windows that are big enough to allow you to come up with a plan or have done a plan and then put it back in. So it's important.
Yeah. Thanks, Kurt. Good info. That pretty much brings us to the end. I'm just scanning through a couple of questions about Brisbane City Council. Yep, we did have some Brisbane City Council people register for the session. I'm not sure if we have anyone from BCC on here at the minute, but we're certainly keen to engage with all land managers. So that's important to us, and it's great to see Kurt particularly, but also the other land managers who've joined us from the Scouts, Kippy WS. It's really good to have you on here. Noosa Council, I think I saw Scenic Rim Council. But yeah, we want these conversations to be about the cooperation and the communication channels. So yeah, as much as we can. I wanted to flag, we are still hosting our coffee and conversation sessions. Our next one's from 11 o'clock, 6th of May. Details are on our website. Registration is essential, so please check that out. Just to finish up, a big thanks for everyone for coming. Thanks to Craig from Blue Sky Trails, and also to Nick and Dale from AusCycling. Thanks to everyone for contributing. A big thanks to Mark for all the work that goes on behind the scenes in things like this forum, and also thanks to the other Outdoors Queensland staff who do so much. We're going to do other single issue forums like this one during 22. We're looking at doing a session on the adventure activity standards in June, I think, Mark. I can't remember the date off the top of my head, sorry.
Yeah, no, nor can I, but it's coming up soon. We'll let you know in due course.
Yeah, so we'll run more of these sessions. If you've got ideas for sessions that you'd like to be involved in, even if you want to be a presenter, let us know. We're always happy to have a chat about what they might look like. But yeah, big thanks for coming along today. Sorry we've run over a little bit, but I think it's one of those things where the conversations just keep going, which is great. So yeah, thank you very much about this. I just saw Pete's comment. It looks like further conversations are required. Yep, they always are. So we might have another look at this sort of thing. Maybe it's one where we look at it in the future. But yeah, really great to have all of you join us today. So thanks very much. As I said, this session is recorded, so that'll be available for people to watch back as well at a later date.
I'll let you send that out this afternoon, Dom, with a copy of the comments as well, or the chat as well.
Terrific. Thanks, Mark. I'll just stop the screen sharing. Thank you very much. I'd just like to say look after yourselves, look after others, and look after the planet. Thanks very much for coming along today.